Alright, hello once again, Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College, and I've been doing a series of video presentations based on the textbook for our AWD1100 C# programming language course. That book is shown here, Murex C# 2015. We've already done chapters 1 through 11 as a class. I have done lectures on 12 through 16 with the exception of 13, which we're skipping, and 17, so I'm going to jump into chapter 18. We may or may not go into this chapter in class depending on time, but we will go through chapter 23. Alright, so chapter 18, as you can see up on the screen right now, is how to work with data sources and data sets. Use a data source to get all data that an application requires. Use a DataGridView control to present data retrieved from a data source. Use other controls like text boxes to present the data that's retrieved by a data source. Write code for handling errors that result in the use of a data source. Use the Dataset Designer to, first, view the schema for the data set of a data source. Second, modify a query using the query builder. Third, preview the data for a query. And fourth, review the SQL statements generated for the source. Those are our applied objectives. For our knowledge objectives, describe the use of a connection string in the app.config file. Describe the use of the fill method of the table adapter object, the update all method of the table adapter manager object. Describe the use of the edit method for the binding source object. Describe the two categories of data errors that can occur when you run an application that uses a data source. Describe the use of the data error event of the GridView control, and finally, in general terms, describe the way SQL statements that are generated for a data source both prevent concurrency errors and refresh a data set when the database generates the keys for new rows. So, as we start working in here, this, as it says, will be your empty data source window. What the goal will be to add things in here like list boxes, text boxes, etc., and then map them up so that they map up with the fields of the database. How do we do that? Well, if you look right here, once we come in and literally add a data source, and a data source is actually shown way down here on the bottom. It's known as an invisible control. And once we do that, and we choose that we want the products table, it'll show us that we've got these fields that are available from there. Alright, so as we walk through here to set up a data source, notice it's wizard driven. We will select database. Alright, we will make sure we set up a connection if one is not set up already. Typically you'll do new connection. And I always recommend that once you set up that connection, that when you get done, you grab this material that's in here and just copy it to the clipboard. Throw it in a file someplace so you know you've got it. Alright. Then we choose Dataset. From here when we go in, it's very important because there's a Microsoft SQL server, but we want the SQL client. We want to use our existing database name. There's a thing here for Windows authentication and SQL Server authentication. You'll want to use Windows, which means that the only, all you'll need to be able to use these databases is to log into your Windows account. If instead you choose not to do that and you choose to also, instead of checking this, you want to check SQL Server authentication, then these will become ungrayed, so will this, and you will then need to set up a username and a password. So it's an additional level of security that you are able to put in here on an as desired basis. When you get done with all that, you should click Test Connection. It should just beep at you, meaning the connection succeeded. Alright? Okay. Again, if you don't want to use SQL Client, you can click the change and that'll bring this up, but you should never have to do that. Unless you're working with something else. Now, be real careful on this because it'll give you names for connection strings and the like, and normally the name will be okay, but look at it, make sure it's the one that you would want to work with. Okay? Once you click this and you say save my connection as this file right here, what's going to happen is there's going to be a file that gets created that's called the app.config file, and in there it's going to have all that information that you just entered. Alright, so it says the connection string, it says local DB, which means that you're using your own machine, Microsoft SQL local DB. Attached DB file name, the directory should be the name of your database.mdf, which is Microsoft database format. Integrated security equals true means to add some additional Windows security, alright, that you get as a freebie, so to speak. And connect timeout equal 30 means that you will try it for 30 seconds, and if you cannot connect within that time, then just time out. Alright, so again, you see the different stuff that's here as we work our way through. And if you click on any one of these tables, it'll show you fields that exist for that table. Okay. Alright. It says omit columns with default values from a data set unless they're needed by the application. In other words, if there's stuff in here we don't need, if we don't care, for example, about showing the on-hand quantity, then don't check it. Okay. Provide values for those columns whenever a row is added to the data set. So then they go through this project, and maybe we'll do this one as a class. I think it would make some sense to do that. Alright, so we'll come through here and we will add these, and you'll notice here what this looks like. Okay, so it says the controls and objects that are needed when you drag a data source onto a form. And the stuff that's in here is the stuff that's down there. Again, these are the invisible controls. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I don't know which one's missing. Probably the DataGridView control, because that's this. Alright. When you run an application with a DataGridView control like this, it kind of looks like a spreadsheet. Like that. Right now, there's a spreadsheet, and you can see some similarities between the way that looks and the way that this looks. You can come in, click the plus sign, and add records. You can highlight a record, click the X, and remove records, etc. So there are a lot of things that you can do with this. You can make changes in it, etc. Now, the good news about this is kind of, for lack of better words, this is kind of a freebie. And what I mean is that once you set it up, this code that you see right here is written for you automatically. Alright? So really and so is this. There's very little code that you have to write when you want to use a DataGridView. Okay? Now, so when do you have to write code? Well, we'll notice in here how to change the default. So if you want to change it to something else, or if you want to work with it in a different way, etc. So here they're choosing details. Why would you do that? Combo box for the state. Alright? Well, what that'll mean is when you run this, the state should be a drop-down. And it should list all of the different states in there. So there's many ways you can set this up, is what I'm saying. Alright? Now, if you look at the customer interface or the user interface for the customer maintenance application, it doesn't look like this. All right? You've got a name, you've got a customer ID, a name and an address, but with a city, state, zip, what we've done is we've kind of put them all together on here. So again, you may have to go in once you start going in and doing some work to customize this. You might have to go in and add some code. Alright, here's the different exceptions that you can get. Since we're working with the SQL classes, it's an SQL exception that we're looking for typically. Alright, common members of the exception classes. So it's never a bad idea, if you're writing your own code, to put this kind of stuff in a try-catch block. Why? Because if it does fail, you can get some information as to what the failure is. When would you fail? Well, for example, if you asked for input for a numeric field and you left it blank or put in something non-numeric, things like that. Here's the ADO.NET exception classes. And again, there's code that handles those classes. I will go back before we get into this part of the class, double check and make sure, maybe go through this whole example with you as a class. Okay. Code that handles data error for a DataGridView. Here's the schema that's presented. This stuff won't make a lot of sense until we do something. For instance, this looks, it's not identical, but it looks very similar. That if you've ever worked in Microsoft Access, that you would set stuff up like this. In other words, up here, it shows your table. You can add other tables in here also. The check fields are the ones that you've included in here. Once you do that and you start pulling in fields, the actual SQL code for this will be written for you. And then when you type execute query, the results will show down here. Right. And you'll notice these are very simple select statements. Okay. The only thing I do want you to note in here is note the @ sign. It inserts a row and it refreshes the data set. So when you want to insert in, that's the new data in the @ sign. When you update, that's the updated data with the @ sign. When you delete, that's the deleted data with an @ sign. That pretty much is it for this chapter. So again, I'll go back through and reread that chapter, and if need be, we will go over that one and that example as a class. So this is Chapter 18 lecture, which we did just in one lecture. And when I come back, I'm going to come in and do the Chapter 23 lecture, which is on link. Be back with that lecture shortly.